Good evening, everyone. I hope you guys had a day as good as mine. We managed to surf in the rain and it was absolutely beautiful. I'm going to be doing a talk tonight that I found absolutely fascinating, and I wanted to share the subject with you guys and why it means so much to me, and it inspires me. It gets me absolutely alive. And called the short talk Dreams, Visions, and Altered States. You know, when you think about even the word altered states, there almost seems to have a bit of a weirdness to it. But if the subject is called you in any way and you're listening, I want to start off really boldly, and I want to suggest that everything we know about society, from the way we behave to our massive breakthroughs, to our beliefs, to our technology, that a large portion of it, like 80% of it, has come out of an altered state or from behind closed eyes. And that's a really, really bold statement. And I'd like to dive into that with you guys, a little bit of how that is possible. And cover a few things like, what is a dream? What happens when we sleep? Do we go somewhere? Is it possible? What different types of altered states we have? And I'm even going to dive into you with a little bit of history of what has actually happened, how people changing their states have completely smashed the course of history, the course of religion, science, biology. It's absolutely fascinating. I love it. But I think just to get started, the one thing is, I'm just having a look here while I'm busy to see. The one thing that's absolutely fascinating is the realization that every night you go to sleep, right? And you wake up the next morning and you have very little recall of what has actually happened there. And I remember sitting one day and thinking, you know, half my life is a blank. It's like I have these strange memories that come across this veil. You know, it must be playful, put my hand there, like we're awake over here and then we fall asleep and we spend all this time. And we come back with these strange memories and strange stories. And of course, you can't help wondering, is it the brain misfiring and what actually happens there? And it's a fascinating thing. Right from very early antiquity, right from the beginning, I want us to consider that dreams and visions have shaped our culture. I mean, I'm just thinking off my top of my head, you know, like following these incredible Kalahari Bushmen and the Khoisan and these different tribes, you know, and when they go into the caves, no matter where in the world, what they discover is a really big part of what they shared in their artistry was essentially of their visions and their dreams. And I can just imagine that for thousands of years, we've been sitting and wondering what it is it means. And, you know, even anthropologically or from a historical point of view, if you study a little bit, you will actually discover that most cultures started off as shamanic cultures. There were tribes, and these tribes tended to have medicine people, or shamans, or witch doctors, or druids, or witches, or whatever you wanted to call them. But essentially what these people were for most of the villages, most of the tribes, most of all of antiquity actually, where they were essentially in some way, although it differed how they did it, essentially what it was that all cultures, and this is important, all cultures have always accepted that there is a veil of reality that you can cross where the laws and the intelligences and the possibilities completely change. And that is behind closed eyes. And to one person, closed eyes is simply when you're trying to sleep. And to another person, there is an entire world of things that you can do in there. So we've been dreaming and having visions since the beginning. And even if you consider how these people would guide people about what they found across the veil, what they discovered, making interpretations for them. Because who hasn't sat and wondered what their dreams mean? Who hasn't dived into the aspects of looking into a book and someone having an opinion of what they think this represents in your dreams? So yeah, from early days, this has been a huge part of culture. But I think to begin, let's just talk about what is Whenever we talk about these things, dreams, visions, altered states, we're talking about inner sight. And all that means is when your eyes are closed, it's things you see, understand, and experience when you are not physically moving around. And of course, just depending on what your belief system is, it holds you to what you think is possible there. So an altered state, essentially, and this is what's so funny, is we are actually altering our state all the time. To alter your state just means that you are constantly in a frequency in your brain, your betas, your thetas, there's all these states, and you're constantly shifting all the time through the day. And I mean, I'm sure we're all aware of it because sometimes we feel so grounded and present and in the now, and sometimes we catch our minds running far away. Sometimes we even discover that we're daydreaming. And I want us to consider, in case this is a subject that you find in defense to, like perhaps a little bit of fear, or I want us to just consider how normal this is. If I drink a cup of coffee, I alter my state. If I take a drug, I alter my state. If I pray, I alter my state. And we know this. We know everything from breathing to relaxation techniques. Now, we've spoken about how altering your state has been a part of the foundation of culture. And I mean, if we travel around the world, if you look at the Maasai, they bounce in a rhythm to get into an altered state. We have tribes in South Africa that use dance, that use drumming, that use plants. All over the world, there are so many ways. When you fast, we've just come out of Ramadan. Many of our brothers and sisters have been fasting, and fasting alters your state. If you've ever done a fast for a day or 2 or 7 or 30, you'll notice that you start to move into quite an altered state. So I want us to just take that fear away from an altered state. Anyone who's ever put his earphones on and walked and sung, and you're always altering your state. But I guess the big question that's on the table right now is, what is the depth of how you can alter your state, and what are the possibilities within that? And what actually happens when you cross this veil? And of course, some people do not even think that there's a veil to cross. And I want to challenge that. So I think a really, really good place for us to start is, I want to look at a couple of ways that an altered state or a trance, or whatever you want to call it, has changed the world. And I want to be quite specific. So as we said, there's so many ways. I mean, the shamanic practices, they use plants to alter your states. Being in a deep state of prayer. I remember I grew up as a Catholic and we used to do rosaries over and over. Chanting can alter your state. Singing, as we said. So I think the first thing that comes to mind, because now we discussed that a plant can alter your state. Well, the one story that comes to mind is, was it James Watson? James Watson discovered DNA. He literally was the first person to even conceptualize the structure of DNA. And I picked that to discuss because I think that must be one of the most breaking, changing moments in the history of biology and the history of our understanding of what's going on with us on a cellular level. But the thing about James Watson is, if you go and research the story, and we never taught this in school, but it's not hidden because it's on nearly every website if you just go read into it. James Watson was very clear that he was on LSD when he, in a state, just letting his mind float, conceptualized this thing that he saw, that he had absolutely no way of knowing what he was looking at. And it went from there. So there is already an example of how the history of medicine was altered by someone using a substance to alter his state. Now, we're certainly not here to glorify using a substance. That was simply him. Then if we were to go to philosophy, because I said not only our technology, I mean philosophy, Socrates. Socrates, I would say, would be one of the most profound philosophers that ever lived. So what's incredible about him is that if you go and research, he spoke about a daemon. And he spoke about the fact that he could go into an altered state behind closed eyes, and he could speak to another aspect of him, or there was a greater realm. I don't want to get too much into his beliefs, but Socrates, one of the founding fathers of philosophy, was quite clear that a lot of his ideas were coming from closing his eyes and crossing this veil and communicating with this intelligence or this quantum field or this cosmic love or whatever it is you perceive that could be on the other side. So already there we've seen medicine has completely changed to people that could go into an altered state. And now we're realizing, and I'm just using one, most philosophers had some form of process, but Socrates was clear about the fact that he was pulling the information away from somewhere else. Absolutely fascinating. It blows my mind. And then let's go into mathematics. Albert Einstein often spoke about what he called his dream experiments. And I don't want to go too deeply into the story, but he had a ball and he used to sit in his office. I've actually got a poster of it that I lost a few years ago, but I used to love it, of the room where he used to sit, and he used to throw the ball against, and then after a while he'd become drowsy against the wall, and then eventually lay back and he would go into like a hazy world. And Albert Einstein basically spoke about the fact that when he discovered the theories of relativity, what he discovered, according to him, was he's letting his imagination flow into this realm beyond the veil. And what he wasn't trying to solve something. He literally just let his mind float. And what he suddenly realized could be true was so far from what could be possible in his mind that he had the idea long before he could prove it. Very similar to what we saw in James Watson. And I find that absolutely incredible. So he went into this dream thought experiment. I'm not sure which one he called it, but it was clearly an altered state, and came back with relativity. So just there in a space of 5 minutes, we have spoken about science, technology. We would not be going to the moon. We would not have medicine as we know it. We would not have our understanding as we know it. And then if there was no such thing as people that freely allowed them freely, without fear, to go into altered states. Incredible how it shaped history. And I mean, what's the other really big thing about being a human being? Belief, culture, and religion. And I don't think I need to tell you that the majority of religious stories that you, all around the world, no matter what religion you are, it was a human being that was having, for the most part, an altered experience where they connected to a prophet or to the divine or to something beyond them. So once again, penetrating this veil. And that is an absolutely incredible thing to consider. So before we move on, I want you to think about, if everything around you has been affected and changed and molded by people that can do this, and it's anybody, but people that did it, let's say that, then if that's how it has shaped the world, is it possible that it is shaping you and could be a powerful tool for you? For some people without them even realizing it. But can you imagine harnessing this, realizing, wow, my inner vision, my inner states could completely transform my life. How do I know that? Well, because other people's inner states have changed the course of history. It's a mind-blowing thing to actually dive into. I think about when we begin to think about what happens behind when we close our eyes. The first thing you think of is falling asleep, and you realize that there is definitely a point where you begin to forget. And what is it that happens when you go into that mystifying place? You know, Descartes spoke about something called the pineal gland. Many people speak about it, and it shows up right from Vedic traditions thousands of years ago into modern spirituality. But Descartes spoke about this little cone-shaped gland that is inside the brain. And what's incredible about the pineal gland, some people call it the third eye, is that for the most part, we actually don't know what it does from a biological perspective. We do know that it regulates melatonin and your circadian rhythms, which is quite fascinating, right? Because melatonin is something that you begin to produce at a certain time of the day, which helps you go into an altered state. And your circadian rhythms is the biorhythm of knowing when you are going to cross that veil. And why this is quite exciting is because you actually realize that this is inbuilt in me. I'm meant to cross this every single night. And why is it that some people can cross it for short whiles and come back? And what is it that's actually going on there? So we've got this pineal gland, which he called the seat of the soul. Now, it's quite a mind-blowing thing. I don't know if you've ever seen the beautiful pictures he used to make, but basically saying that your soul is anchored right at that point. So if there was a part of you that was non-physical, if there was a soul, whatever, because I really don't work with belief. I work with possibility. I like ideas, not closing down on how things are. And if it is possible that there is a big part of you that is non-physical, that he was saying it must be anchored somewhere in the body. And where the physical meets the non-physical, according to so many cultures, is at that point. In some ways, you could call it your aerial. You could call it your aerial to experience a greater reality. Now, I know for some people, they might be thinking, God, that sounds a little bit spiritual, wishy-washy, but is it? You know, a human being can only perceive under 1% of the electromagnetic spectrum. That literally means we can't even see 1% of reality. So the idea that we would have an aerial that would connect us in is really not that hard to understand. And we begin to also understand that there's a very strong possibility that in modern culture, one of the reasons that we are battling so much in an existential threat, crisis, mental illness, is perhaps because this, should we call it soul Wi-Fi, is at jeopardy and is affected far more than we realize by our external environments, by electronics, by health, by screens. And it's a fascinating thing to consider. And one thing that you can look into, which will fascinate you, is that they look at pineal glands after they've opened the brain after death, and they've noticed that people's pineal glands are becoming far more calcified than they ever used to. So they actually get this hard enamel on the outside. And that's an incredible thing, because if all these ancient cultures, as well as modern teachers, are correcting what this pineal gland is, then the fact that certain substances, which, just for interest's sake, because we don't want to do too much information here, tends to be the heavy metals, attack that area of the brain. Can you imagine that what's meant to happen is that we're meant to be able to walk next to the ocean, take a deep breath, and immediately feel that we're part of something bigger. And people that spend a lot of time in nature will tell you how quickly it changes. Or have you ever been camping when you're having the worst time of your life? You go camping, and after 3 days, it's like you're just connected to something and everything feels okay again and the panic goes away. I think there's so much static that is created by our environments. So I want us to just consider that there's a possibility that if we are not looking after this little area in our brain, that what would result is you would start to look around and believe that what you see is that is all there is. And I can tell you, I've been at points in my life where I allowed myself to become so unhealthy that my, let's call it, my connection was down. And that's how it felt. And I felt so isolated and scared and alone. And I can imagine that so many people are there. And it's an incredible thing that I believe that there are so many people teaching this, but you can decalcify your pineal gland and you can actually get yourself to feel like when you close your eyes that you are connecting far more powerfully. So I found this really, really moving. And many people, as you know, call it the third eye. What does this have to do with anything? Why are we having this discussion? Well, essentially, this conversation is about when I close my eyes, the experiences and the things I see there. What's fascinating is there are so many different levels of activation that you can create. You know, if I think about certain Vedic traditions and certain sects of Buddhism, they use removal of certain senses and things to activate that area of the brain. So an example is you've heard stories of people that go and live in caves and not eat and in absolute darkness. And as the legend goes, I wouldn't know if they've experienced it, but I've read about it so many times. is in the absolute black and dark, sitting in the cave, using fasting to alter their state and prayer. They begin in the darkness to see light, which is absolutely incredible. And then if you go into other cultures, like in South America and even in England and Scotland with the Gaelics, and they would use plants to open that area where you would literally open up a whole world or a whole reality within inside yourself. And I find that, mind-blowing. So what that makes us realize is that there is nothing weird about this. Everybody has essentially done it before. It happens to you every single night. And this is a conversation that would make you realize perhaps that this is something you want to look into a little bit deeper, and how is it that we tap into those states, and what are the possibilities really regarding it. Yeah. When you close your eyes, what essentially happens is, for most people, I'm doing it now, you just see black at first. But what's interesting is as you go deeper into the states, you can go into what I think they call hypocognic states. And that is, if it's ever happened to you, it usually happens to people when they're quite tired. And I think because the veil gets quite thin, the ego thins. And you'll notice if you're very tired, or perhaps haven't slept for a day or two, you close your eyes, you have what almost seems like random firing and images and things that just almost don't make sense. And for a lot of people, that's their first experience of the inner world. And there are so many different ways. People that are trained with the inner eye, they can do so many things. Remote viewing would be, if you close your eyes, would be to travel, to look at a certain place or thing. A vision would be something that you're experiencing, as we just said, inside. And that also takes us then to dreams. So when you fall asleep at night, tell me this hasn't happened to absolutely everyone. You either wake up in the middle of the night with this absolutely terrified, or you have a dream that you're so disappointed is over. And some dreams certainly are random. They certainly do seem silly. But some dreams, you just know that there's so much more to it, that it just seems profound. I've had dreams affect me for days. And as you know, because we spoke about what happened in antiquity, people have been trying to work out what is being said for as long as we know. We know that some people claim that they see events happen before they happen. But one thing I know for sure for myself, I can only speak for myself, is that in my dream world, what definitely happens is that you definitely get to face the deepest parts of your fears in this, to me, perfectly safe reality. And it's an incredible thing how your fears rise up. Especially when you start, any time that you're working, even a meditation or a prayer, or any time you quiet the mind, the imagination often tries to run. And I find that when you go through that eye of the needle, which just means from fully conscious to whatever state, prayer, whatever it is you're working in, that when I go through that eye of the needle, I feel a lot of resistance. And I often feel, I think resistance is the right word, a lot of static and a lot of doubt and a lot of fears. And it makes you realize just how loud it gets in there. But if you can relax yourself and move past that, there's just so many possibilities. But even for you right now, if you're watching this and you're just interested in dreams, it's an incredible thing, because archetypes, there are definitely certain archetypes that always show up. I remember when I first read about Carl Jung, why he was so convinced that there was a collective unconscious. It was a fascinating story, and I must be honest, I don't remember all the details, but he had a patient at one stage that kept repeating a line that had something to do with a disk within the sun within, I don't know, it was about 15 words. And this patient repeated this and repeated this. And Carl Jung was quite fascinated by this. And he was already convinced early on in his work that certain things were showing up in all people, almost as though beyond that veil, we were all far more connected to an ocean of thought than we realized, perhaps only really separate when we were in our bodies. And as the story goes about, I could have this wrong because I wasn't intending to mention this, about 3 or 4 years after this experience, which he recorded and always wondered what it meant, they uncovered, I think it was Dead Sea Scrolls or something, I'm not sure which ones, but whatever it was, they uncovered something for the first time in history. It was huge. I think it might have been the Dead Sea Scrolls. And when they started to translate these scrolls, one of the things that happened is one of the scrolls began with a sentence that this guy kept repeating, which almost made no sense. And he sat down absolutely baffled. And it was in that moment, because he had basically asked the universe, so he didn't call it the universe, he had asked for some direction to whether there could be a collective unconscious. And would you believe it, he realized that there is no way, he racked his brain for months, that this guy could ever have known this was going to come out years later. So I find that fascinating. And he started to map out the archetypes that exist. And we're not going to get into that now, but it's such an incredible thing to do. And one of the things I do in my work and in my courses is we begin with dreams, because we start with something that everybody is really akin to. It happens to everyone. Everyone's fascinated by it. We've all had those incredible dreams. And one of the first things we need to do is remember as much of what's going on when you cross the veil as possible. So the first thing we do is recall training. And recall training is not as boring as it sounds. It's just a simple skill where you learn when you're waking up in the morning and you're starting, or in the middle of the night, and you're starting to come to how to stop before you allow yourself to cross back, and to look and see what it is you're doing, to go through the detail of the dream. And then when you come back, even write it down. But that's not the most effective technique. I'm not going to get into techniques now. And very soon what starts happening is you come back, and because you've trained yourself for a few weeks, you can actually remember large portions of what's been going on the other side. And that's when you can start diving into letting your dreams guide you and decide which dreams are random and not important for you, and which dreams have a message for you. It's absolutely incredible. But then we start getting into the part that gets me quite excited. It happens to some people by accident. It happens to people when they have near-death experiences. It happens to 30% of people when they're sleeping. And what it is when you are completely unconscious, you become fully conscious, what appears to be in another place. Now, I'm just saying what appears to be. The simplest form of this that most people experience is called a lucid dream. And what would happen, if you're wondering if you've ever had one, you're going along in your dream, and of course you don't know that you're in your dream because you're unconscious and you don't remember it, and something happens. I always have this tree that I've taught myself to find, but it used to happen to me by accident. And as soon as I see this tree, I go, oh my word, I'm dreaming. And the second that I realize I'm dreaming, I suddenly become fully awake inside my dream. And then you begin to play. Or sometimes you just get scared. I know in the beginning, I used to run away from things and all my thoughts and fears would express. But a lot of people have told you stories of flying in a dream and just how real it felt. And I will never forget when I started waking myself up inside my dreams, the first time I flew. I was so scared that I couldn't. And I remember like I could feel what felt like wind, and just reality wasn't the same, but I remember launching to try and fly. And suddenly I was going so fast. I remember screaming. Wow, it was just such an incredible feeling. It was absolutely amazing. So those are lucid dreams. And most people have a lucid dream by accident. And some people, as you know, begin to actually train themselves on how to wake themselves up inside the dream. But there is only so much control you can have. And what it appears to be, to most teachers will tell you, that lucid dreams tends to wake you up in a dream world or a dream state. But there's something even more interesting, because, I mentioned near-death experiences, and it's what used to happen to me. And I think this is where we go from the realm of what we've been talking about. We've been talking about famous people and how ordinary this is, and dreams, it happens every night. This would probably start going into the category of what you would consider slightly more unusual. And what happens is, for me, I was about 7 or 8 years old, and I woke up one morning. It was already day. It was very, very, it was dawn. It was very, very light sun coming through my window. And I suddenly realized that I was looking down at my body. I was standing next to my bed. Oh man, did this cause a crisis for me. I got such a fright, and next thing I sat bolt up in bed. And this happened to me many, many times. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it was quite traumatic. And unfortunately asked for some help from people, and no one could tell me what it was that was happening. And I'm a bit of an old fogey now, so that was before it was as easy to just go onto YouTube and to just discover things. And I wish that I'd had that guidance. You know, as much as the frustration of all this modern information, it's almost like so much information and so little wisdom. It's also been a leap, though, if you do know how to find the right information and to focus on it and not allow yourself to get drowned out and to keep the vision clear. I wish that I had had the guidance, but I didn't. And I eventually came across a book on Buddhism, I think when I was about 40 years old, after constantly having this experience. But to be honest with you, just terrified a lot of the time. I'd get quite brave sometimes. And then as soon as I started to think, but what if, then I'd pop back into my body. And I found this book on Buddhism, which had, funny enough, I had the book until a few years ago, which had a single chapter, and it wasn't on Buddhism, it was by a Buddhist monk from Tibet, a single chapter on this guy explaining how it is that they project consciously out of their bodies. And it was literally 18 pages that changed my life. I've gone back to look at it now, and it was actually not that descriptive. I actually don't know, I think it was just so excited that this guy was explaining these feelings that you get, and then that, and it gave me a permission slip. I just needed someone in the world to tell me that I was safe and that it was okay. And, you need to understand at that stage, I didn't really have a choice. This is something that was happening all the time. And I began to do my explorations, and now here I am in the middle age, and it's become a huge part of, I would say, some of my top 50 experiences of all time have been first exiting my body and going to explore. So the thing about this is that, another thing I was talking about how natural this actually is if you've ever had sleep paralysis, when I first started doing videos on sleep paralysis, I knew that it's a subject that scares quite a people, but I was really passionate about actually putting a video together about what sleep paralysis actually is, because I thought, if this has traumatized so many people that I've coached or spoken to, perhaps it has traumatized far more people than you think. And I put that video up describing sleep paralysis, and I ended up speaking to about 10 people in the next 2 days. Some of them were on medication, some of them had PTSD, some of them had nightmares because they were so scared about the fact that they would sometimes wake up and not be able to move for a certain period. And it just made me realize that there's so much wisdom and knowledge that we've known for thousands of years that we just kind of stopped talking about. And that's left us with our body and our pineal gland and our circadian rhythms and our melatonin drops. And it's left us going to the state regardless. We've just made an assumption as a modern human being. We've made this assumption that you're not supposed to be involved in your dreams, that you're supposed to sleep and then you only come back the next day. And for some people, almost as though it's some sort of a spiritual calling or an accident, whatever you want to call it, I think it's a bit of a calling, but not that it makes you special. I think anybody can do it. Some people have this experience of whether it's drug-induced or whether it is religiously induced, or whether they are having an operation or they are just fast asleep. And they have this experience of seeing themselves without their body for the first time. I will never forget looking down at the patterns on my shirt, the way I was lying. And the one thing that absolutely blew my mind is I remember actually seeing a red mark across my forehead. And I only realized the next day, because my nail was long, I had scratched myself in my sleep. But it's incredible because I remember seeing this on my forehead and getting a fright and then sitting up in my body. And as I sat up, the first thing I did was this, because it was sore, and realizing that I had seen it from the outside. Absolutely incredible. So this happens to people. This happens to a lot of people, but you can actually train yourself to do it. And as I said, the sleep paralysis conversation is so important, because if anything, some people might not want to explore this deeper. Some people just want to know it's okay and just switch it off and just not get too scarred. But when we start getting to the conversation of sleep paralysis, or what is called phasing, this is where people that actually train to experience inner visions, inner states, this is where it actually begins. And it's nothing unique to any culture, whether someone's sitting in a deep meditation or however it is they do it. And we call this essentially, there's so many words for it, but there's astral traveling. If you've ever wondered what the difference between astral traveling and lucid dreaming is, lucid dreaming means you were completely unconscious. You don't actually know how you got to where you are, and suddenly you wake up. Astral traveling, or out-of-body experiences, what the difference is that fully conscious, we never fall asleep. We are completely awake. What we do is we train ourselves to enter those theta states to a point where the hypercognitive imaging starts and the visions start lightly. And what happens now is your body begins to lock down. So the first thing is you start to get like a temporary paralysis and pins and needles, your breathing changes. It feels like something really, really heavy is on your chest. And once that happens, a trained practitioner or someone that learned to do it by accident like me, what happens is that you can actually roll out of your body. You can actually go and explore and adventure. And I'm not going to go too much into that, because I know this is very challenging for some people. But it's an absolutely fascinating thing to realize, if you've ever woken up completely frozen, that the reason for that was quite simply that when you go to sleep at night and you begin to fall asleep, your body locks your whole, your mind and your soul, whatever you want to call it, locks your whole physical body down, so that if you go and explore, that your body doesn't go with. And we know it doesn't work very well with some people, because some people have a little bit of a broken mechanism and they go sleepwalking and they're still doing things. And so it's a fascinating thing. So in the training, what we do is we learn about dreams, we learn about recalling the dreams, and then we start to learn to allow your dreams to guide you. So that's the one section, and it's incredible. I absolutely love it. Then the other section is when you begin to want to be fully conscious, because if you think about it, when you're working with dreams, you are actually working with the memory of what happened in the night. What changes when we start to do conscious exploration, whether you think you're exploring inside your body, or whether you think you're going to another dimension, or you don't need a belief system for this. You're going to feel very challenged when you start doing it, because you're going to have to try and decide for yourself in linguistic framework what you think is going on there. But the difference is, when we start talking about conscious travel, we are talking about, through breathing, through relaxation, through techniques, getting to the point where you're so relaxed that you actually feel your body lock down, and then the experience of leaving, or as I said, if you want to think it's inside yourself, and you stay fully conscious. But what you begin to experience in the next moment is an entire world where you are awake, you can move, you have fears, you have thoughts, but you are not bound in any way to physical reality. You think this, you still feel, you still have fear. It's absolutely incredible. And what is possible in that state? Well, I can tell you, for me, I believe that I can go into completely different realities. I can meet different things and beings. I can go into parallel lives. I'm aware of myself as another being. But like things like that are conversations that people don't really want to have. And I don't think it's really important for this talk. I mean, if anything, I just wanted to share with you guys a little bit about how much there is actually to this. So guys that train in this, there's basically 3 stages to the training. The first stage to the training, I mean, there's quite a lot. We talk a lot about fear. We talk about the possibilities, because as soon as you start getting to that point, everyone who does one of these courses, they're like, or that happens to them by accident, doesn't believe that it can happen until they realize something's happening. And what happens then is when you go through this, what I call the eye of the needle, or you're crossing the veil of reality, it just means you're going into a different state, right? You're moving from physical to non-physical. There are many ways of explaining it. To go through that and to stay relaxed and surrendered, to go through that, you essentially go through a period where everything feels very intense and very psychedelic and very trippy. Reality bends and feels strange. And that is why, if you've ever woken up in sleep paralysis, first of all, there is a lot of paintings and art from the Middle Ages where they paint things sitting on people's chests and like scary images on the wall. And because when you are switching between physical and non-physical reality, just for a very short period of time, things get very trippy. And it's incredible because when people are training, if you, for instance, have a big fear of death, when people are training to switch into that state, that's what they keep getting a fright of. They think, oh, I'm going to die. Or if people are afraid of like non-physical things, then that comes up a lot for them. Or if people are afraid of their own confidence and they doubt themselves, when they start to go through there, they start to feel very small. And it's an incredible thing because it's almost like to begin to use this doorway, fully conscious. I don't know this for a fact. This is just how it appears to me and all the people that I've trained. Just to go through that door, you have to face an aspect of yourself. You have to become aware of what your deep, deep fears are. And I've never found a more profound therapy in my life because, you know, in my coaching work, I work with people with trying to ascertain what their fears is so we can work with that shamanic wolf and face it, so that those fears don't control us. But what I have noticed is that most people actually do not know what their deepest fear is. And the incredible thing is, as soon as someone moves into an altered state, they begin to understand what it is. And naturally, they pull back. But now they have an opportunity to address that, to research that, to pray on that, to think about that, so that they can literally face something that's controlling their actions and their anxieties and their behaviors from the deepest recesses. I found that incredible. And if they're able to cross this threshold, then the last part of kind of, I suppose that wouldn't really be done in an opening course, is how to move around, how to choose who you want to go and find. And because you can even go find friends, it's absolutely fascinating. And there are all sorts of laws in the non-physical. If you have fearful thoughts, you create those realities immediately. If you're feeling excited and expansive, you immediately find your environment starts to match. It's almost like the way water, if you're in water and you suddenly turn into oil because you're having fearful thoughts, you will suddenly float up and you'll be in a different reality. In this ocean, it's incredible. If I start having really deep thoughts about the divine and love, suddenly the whole universe starts changing in that way to that. And whether I'm actually traveling into a completely different dimension or whether like a radio station, all those dimensions are right here on top of each other. And just in altering that we're actually having that experience, I don't know. But I can tell you that some of my most profound experiences, flying over the ocean here in Muizenberg, flying through a mountain, fully awake, rushing towards the mountain. And as I was going through the mountain, it occurred to me, I got so scared because it got so dark. And suddenly I could see all these beautiful creatures and spirits inside the mountain. Oh, wow. And the conversations that I have had at night and in broad daylight, sometimes I get home early in the afternoon and I lie down, I see if I can get myself to that point. Oh, such adventures. And there are 3 stages to that training, essentially would be the way that we relax and disconnect the body. Then there would be how we activate the phasing or the sleep paralysis. And then the 3rd stage is how we project. Now, unfortunately, the internet is filled with projection techniques, but it actually will very, very seldom work, because if you actually know how to get yourself into phasing, you can actually project in so many different ways. It's comical. I can project through a vision. I can project, as I said, by rolling. There's all sorts of ways. And pretty much a really good projector will have a lot of techniques for each 3 of those phases, so they can mix it up. And also, one of the most powerful ways when you're learning to consciously project is most people find it very difficult to do when they're fully awake. So they wake up early in the morning in their training, and while they're still sleepy, then they do it from there. And I'm not going to go too much in what it is that we think actually happens there. I can just tell you that it has forever altered my life. But going back to this big conversation we've had, these are conversations we don't really have. And these are things that we find to be, I guess you could say, really, really strange in modern culture. It's not very spoken about, but I honestly think that it's a huge conversation. And I think it needs to come back, because I really perceive, and so did so many people, and so much history. I hope you get excited about this and start researching. Wow, that these top philosophers actually talk about this area that's in your brain. I want you to just consider that through drugs and through health and through electronics and Wi-Fi, and that we have interrupted the pineal gland to the point where it's not feeling its environment and the earth and other people as well as it should. And it's isolation. And I think that we are not only facing a huge awakening in what we are aware of in our thoughts and in our words and in our actions, but in also how to interact with our physical bodies. And therefore, obviously, a big part of what we do on these courses is we also teach people how to get that pineal gland healthy and going again. And some of it is absolutely fascinating, like teaching people when they close their eyes, how many different ways that you can have the vision. If it sounds crazy, let me put it to you this way. If you close your eyes right now, and I asked you, I want you to imagine a house, you can imagine a house. But then I ask you, I want you to imagine a house that you've been to before from your childhood. You will see a house, but now you are fetching that house out of the memory bank. So you're actually using a different area of your pineal gland. And then if I were to say to you, I want you to, I'm actually not going to go too deeply into it. So there are so many different areas that you can train yourself to use. And then the most fascinating thing is that knowing that shamans and guys, any sort of holistic practitioners have been giving herbs and plants to people for thousands of years to heal wounds and things, you start to discover that, as far as we know, as far back as 5,000 or 6,000 years, I mean, there are some people that have been found, like mummies, with pouches with some of these herbs and things in. That's how we know, because it was precious to them. We've been using dream herbs for thousands of years. And I tell you, dream herbs are the most incredible thing, because none of them are psychedelic or psychoactive. They are very, very subtle. Like you could take them and completely have a completely normal day and not even know you're on them. But they tend to affect you only when you're switching over into those REM or altered states. And there are some incredible dream herbs. I don't know if you know that a lot of the First Nations South African culture is actually built on, like, for instance, the Zulus and Xhosas, like with ubalaus, and which are all these different, every kind of tribe had their own special mix that they create, and they make a froth and they drink the froth, and they also have purgative experiences, and then it changes their dreams. But what's interesting to know is that in most shamanic stores nowadays, I had a look the other day, out of something like 10 of the most suggested dream herbs in the world, 6 of them come from Cape Town area and South Africa. So we as South Africans have an incredible opportunity, if you are South African, to interact with these things directly. So besides learning about your dreams, and besides learning to alter your states and explore the different kind of ways you can switch your third eye into visionary states, and besides getting your dreams to work for you in everyday life, and besides exploring how to consciously exit your vehicle we also learn the plants that can help do it. And that's kind of the last part, is you'll learn about which plants you could get and how to use them, etc. So yeah, I hope you guys have found this interesting. We've really just jumped very broadly over a subject. I think it's fascinating just in its own, but what this is it's a very light opening talk to a course that I run about 2 or 3 times a year, Shamanic States. And I'm beginning it at the end of the month, and I'm going to take about 10 people, and it is done online, and it involves a few things, like we meet every week for a couple of weeks. It also involves doing a little bit of one-on-one coaching with me near the end of the course. And the reason for that is everybody's going to have problems in different places, and everyone is going to be completely excited by different things. Some people like really focus on the dream side because they start understanding how to access their dreams, and they're so passionate about that that's what they focus on in the course. And then some people want to experience this experience of walking without your body or looking at your body, because have you ever considered how much that would forever change what you believe? You know, when people ask me what I believe, I tell them I don't really believe anything. I believe everything. But when they ask me, do I think I die when my body does? And I say, well, to me, that's not even a belief. I know I don't. And the reason for that is because I can explore without my body. So some people become more excited about that in the course, because it's the possibility of how it would change their philosophy of life, on how they're interacting with this universal mind. And some people get more fascinated into the plants, which we do in the course, but we kind of go deeper into the second course. Yeah, and if you guys have any questions, my email address is the only thing that I use in my life. I don't even follow my WhatsApp very well. I don't answer my phone. And it's kind of a personal choice. It's just for my own mental health. I can't chase all these things. I only really use email. And from email, I can easily then set up a call or something. But my email is easy to understand considering the subject. It's outofbodyguide@gmail.com. So Out of Body Guide. And as I say, this course will be starting at the end of the month. We will be doing 2 groups, because we'll have 2 different time zones, because not everyone is naturally using the same clock as us. And that's about it. Yeah, so send me an email if you want some information. You'll notice that on this broadcast, there is a link to the course. If you want to click on that and go check the course out. I think we're only 4 so far, so we've got about 6 of us still, space in the second group. And yeah, it's a fascinating thing. I mean, the incredible thing is when we're working with projection, we are essentially using what we call the etheric, which is the energy field, the first layer of your energy field. And what's fascinating is we use that etheric to project, or to you start being able to feel the etheric, etc. And what I've noticed in these courses over the years is once you start projecting your etheric, you start being able to see it. So another thing we do in the course, and it's about 40-50% of people that get it right, is we start practicing to actually see the energy field that we're working with, or projecting, or manipulating and using. Yeah, I think that's about it. I don't want to make it too deep and too rich. I hope you guys have an incredible evening. I am actually quite cold. I'm going to go jump in under my bed, and I will chat to you guys in the coming days.